Trae Young is probably the most controversial player in the NBA right now. You have one side of people that says that basically he just sucks. He doesn't guard anybody. He just has the ball a ton, puts up all these big numbers on teams that generally aren't that successful. Yes, I know that they went to the conference finals that one year, but generally Trae Young teams are not that successful. And then you have the other side that say, well, how can he be a bad player? How is he not a all-star caliber player when Atlanta's offense is always really, really good? Statistically, every single season that Trae Young is out there, Atlanta's offense is one of the better offenses in the league, especially relative to their talent level. But if you just look at the win-loss numbers, the one number that matters over the last handful of seasons for Trae Young and the Atlanta Hawks, they just have not been good enough. That is an inarguable point. You can talk about the roster, you can talk about the talent around him, but this is a team that has not been good for most of the years that Trae Young has been there. But on the other hand, they haven't really handled the roster very well. He's never really had star talent around him, unless you count someone like DeJounte Murray, who didn't work well alongside of Trae Young the way that Atlanta's front office thought that he would. And the best teams that they've had have just been a lot of high caliber role players around the focal point of their team, which is Trae Young. And now going into this season, everyone is keeping an eye on what could happen in Atlanta with the future of this roster, as they clearly went younger this offseason, trading away DeJounte Murray, bringing in Dyson Daniels. They had the first pick in the draft. They brought in Zacharie Richacher. Clearly, there is a possibility that Trae Young won't be on the roster a year from now and isn't part of the long-term plan in Atlanta. And it's one thing for me to stand here and speculate what Trae Young does or doesn't think, but he actually just came out and told us all of his thoughts on all of this stuff. In a recent podcast appearance, Trae Young talked about all kinds of stuff, including what he thinks about the 2024 draft class and his new teammate, first overall pick, Zacharie Richacher.
The guys that got drafted, I mean, from the outlook looking in, and some guys may surprise us, but a lot of us look at them as role players coming in anyway. I feel like the GMs all this year are probably just trying to figure out who's going to be the best role player for their team.
Now, the thing is, Trae Young didn't lie a single time. He's not wrong about anything that he just said. Nobody around the league saw the 2024 class as one that had multiple franchise players or really any franchise players. The concept of the peak player from this class, whoever the number one overall in a redraft is 5 years from now, that guy being just a high-level role player, that was kind of the concept of this class. So he's not wrong. But it's a little bit weird to say that not only about a class and say that publicly when these guys haven't even played yet, but also when your team selected someone first overall in that class, essentially saying that Richacher's long-term projection is just as a role player. Again, not wrong, but kind of a weird thing to say about your newest high-profile teammate. Now, to be fair, it's not like Trae Young said only negative things about him.
Zach could be that complimentary piece.
And I, to be honest with you, I see that in his game. Like he's taller in person.
He's got size.
Like he's 6'10" with frame. Like he's a defender. Like he doesn't have to do much. You can knock down open shots, get stops. I mean, we're gonna have a taller team. I mean, with him on the wing.
But again, he continues to go back to this concept of everybody else on the team is a role player. They got rid of DeJounte Murray. They have Zacharie Richacher. They have all these other guys, Dyson Daniels, guys that have been there for years, like Bogey and Clint Capella. They're all just role players around him. And he continues to double down on this concept of he's never truly had stars around him. And again, he's not wrong. It's just kind of a weird thing to say publicly. I can certainly appreciate the honesty, and it's awesome content, and it's really cool to talk about. It's just strange to hear a player talk like that publicly. And that point that I made about him never really having played with a star before, he discussed that as well.
Who would that player be that you'd be like, you know what? I would love to play with him.
I can make anybody better. Like just the way I play, I'd rather get an assist than a bucket.
But I did think it was interesting that some of the hosts tried to sneak in some Anthony Davis stuff in there. Like, hey, man, why didn't you want to come play for the Lakers?
That's how I see.
What about AD? That works.
AD makes everybody better as well around him.
Come on over to Cali.
No, for sure. But that's
why didn't that happen? Because that has been a persistent rumor really for a while. We don't know what side ultimately ended those discussions, whether it be the Lakers not being interested or the Hawks not thinking they were getting enough in exchange. But that to me still feels like a thread that we need to continue to follow and pay attention to, the possibility of Trae Young being a Laker someday. And these kinds of conversations between players are just always so interesting to me because you really get an idea of what their perception is of other guys around the league. Speaking of perception, this is the part that gets really interesting to me as it relates to Trae Young, because there's this idea of Trae as almost a selfish player, right? It's hard to look at his statistics and say that he's a selfish player because his assist numbers are incredible. But we've had guys in the past like James Harden, Russell Westbrook that have unbelievable numbers, have a ton of assists, but aren't necessarily seen as selfless guys. They have the ball a ton, and when you have the ball that much and you have that much attention on you, you're going to get some assists. And to a certain extent, that perception of him has made it really difficult for him to be in some of these higher level conversations over the past couple of years, whether it be in contention for all-star teams, All-NBA, or I didn't put him in my 2028 Team USA roster when we talked about what that roster would look like a couple of years from now. I didn't put him on there either, and it's hard for him to get to that level when there's this perception of him as being selfish. Now, he said that that perception doesn't necessarily bother him.
I mean, I don't really, to be honest, I stopped worrying about how many people or what the narrative was or what people don't like about me or things like that. Like, I really genuinely focus on the people that really care about me or really know who I am and really are supporting me and things like that. So to be honest, I don't really think about if I'm underrated or not.
But he does find it strange that he isn't in more contention for All-Star, All-NBA stuff, and basically blamed these other coaches around the league like they're holding a grudge against him because he's killing their teams, and then they just don't really respect it, so they don't put him on the All-Star team, which doesn't really make a ton of sense because they have to put somebody on the team.
I don't know where the hate for you came from. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, just around the league, you constantly 25 plus, 30 plus, 10 assists plus, and left off of all-star nods. And it's like, where is this coming from?
By coaches that I'm doing it to.
But it's absolutely an argument that Trae Young is, given his statistics and some of his impact, the most overlooked star in the entire league. And it does feel like almost no matter what numbers he puts up, it's just going to be difficult for him to be in contention for some of those higher level conversations until they start hopefully winning some more basketball games in Atlanta pretty soon. Now, I would push back on one thing because he mentions that he doesn't see himself as a selfish player. He always, would rather get someone an assist than get a bucket. All that's fine. But there's two things that I think lead to that perception. One is his either inability or just refusal to play off the ball and to learn how to play off the ball. I understand that he's someone that's had the ball in his hands his entire life, but his ability to shoot, come off screens, all this different stuff should work really well with other stars, and it just doesn't. And we saw that with DeJounte Murray. That's the other thing. You can talk about not having a star, but DeJounte Murray's a good player. They should have complemented each other. And all the fault is not on Trae Young. Some of that fault is on Murray as well. But it's hard for me not to push back on some of the things that Trae Young is saying when he just refuses to play any other kind of role than he already has. And the bottom line is, for Trae Young, for the Hawks, this feels like it could be a make or break season. A year from now, he could be on a different team. A year from now, Atlanta could have a completely different direction, or maybe they have a surprisingly good season. They have some growth from some of the young guys. Richacher looks really good, and Trae Young is still, he's not like he's 30 years old. He's still certainly someone that is entering his prime, and if they can put together some good young pieces, there can still be the Trae Young era in Atlanta, and they can get back to conference finals. And to me, they're one of the most interesting teams in the league, and he's one of the most interesting players in the league to look at this upcoming season.